The metal pipe felt cold in Kennedy Hart's hands as she gripped it tighter, her back pressed against the concrete wall of the abandoned warehouse. Two men stood between her and the only exit, their faces twisted with malicious intent. Her phone lay shattered on the floor, the screen cracked into a spiderweb of broken glass. She could taste copper in her mouth, where she'd bitten her lip, and her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. "Nowhere to run now, little girl," the taller man said, taking another step toward her. His partner circled to the left, blocking any chance of escape. Kennedy's grip on the pipe tightened until her knuckles turned white. She'd gotten herself into this mess by digging too deep, asking too many questions, and now she was going to pay the price. The door behind them exploded inward with a deafening crash. Kennedy's eyes widened as Park Ji-ho burst through, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive Armani shirt torn at the shoulder, holding a crowbar like he'd been born for street fights. For a moment, time seemed to stop. This was the boy who had made her life hell for months, the rich Korean student body president who'd had her car towed on her first day, the enemy who'd mocked her scholarship status and challenged her at every turn. And yet here he was, eyes blazing with protective fury, looking at her like she was the only person in the world that mattered. "Get away from her," Ji-ho said, his voice low and dangerous in a way Kennedy had never heard before. But to understand how Kennedy Hart and Park Ji-ho ended up in an abandoned warehouse fighting for their lives, we need to go back 3 months. Back to the beginning, when Kennedy thought the worst thing that could happen to her was surviving her first day at Atlanta's most elite preparatory academy. Hi, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. So let's get back to the story. Kennedy had woken up at 5:30 that morning in her small bedroom in Decatur, the August heat already making her sheets stick to her skin. She could hear her mother, Diane, moving around in the kitchen, preparing for her 12-hour nursing shift at Grady Memorial Hospital. The smell of coffee and slightly burnt toast drifted through the thin walls of their 2-bedroom apartment. Kennedy sat up, rubbing her eyes, and looked at her new Brookhaven Preparatory Academy uniform hanging on the back of her door. The crisp white blouse and plaid skirt represented everything she'd worked for, every late-night studying, every practice test, every scholarship application she'd poured her heart into. "You up, baby?" her mother called from the kitchen. Kennedy threw on her robe and padded out to find Diane already in her scrubs, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, exhaustion evident in the lines around her eyes, but pride shining through nonetheless. "First day at Brookhaven Prep," Kennedy said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "No big deal, right?" Diane pulled her daughter into a tight hug. "You earned this, Kennedy Marie. Don't you forget that. You're just as good as any of those rich kids, you hear me? Better, because you had to work for it." "I know, Mama." Kennedy hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of cocoa butter lotion and hospital antiseptic that always clung to her mother's skin. "Where's Dante?" Kennedy asked, pulling back. Her older brother usually made an appearance before her mother's shifts to make sure everything was locked up tight and that Kennedy had everything she needed for the day. "Already left for his early class at Georgia Tech," Diane said, handing Kennedy a piece of toast. "But he left you a note on the counter. Said something about calling him if you need anything." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "He also said to be careful at that school. Something about the students there being different." Kennedy rolled her eyes. "Dante thinks everyone is out to get me. I'll be fine. It's just a school." But as Kennedy pulled up to Brookhaven Preparatory Academy 3 hours later in her mother's 2008 Honda Civic, she realized that calling it just a school was like calling the Atlantic Ocean just water. The campus sprawled across perfectly manicured lawns that looked like they'd been trimmed with scissors. The main building was a mixture of modern glass and traditional brick that screamed old money and new influence. Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas filled the parking lot like a luxury car dealership. Kennedy's Civic looked like it had wandered into the wrong zip code entirely. She took a deep breath, adjusted her backpack, and started scanning for a parking spot. Most of the lot was full, but she spotted one near the main entrance, partially hidden by an overgrown bush. Perfect. She pulled in, checked her makeup in the rearview mirror one last time, and grabbed her bag. Time to show Brookhaven Prep what a girl from Decatur could do. Kennedy made it exactly 15 feet from her car before she heard it. The sharp, expensive sound of dress shoes on pavement, moving fast. She turned to see a group of students parting like the Red Sea, their attention fixed on someone approaching. And then she saw him. Park Ji-ho moved through the campus like he owned it, which, given the Park Industries donation wing she'd seen on her tour, he basically did. He was tall, with the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers, his black hair styled perfectly, his uniform tailored to fit him like a second skin. But it was his eyes that caught Kennedy's attention, cold and calculating, scanning the parking lot with an expression of irritation that made her instinctively straighten her spine. Those cold eyes landed on Kennedy's car, and his jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone without breaking stride, and Kennedy watched in confusion as he made a call, gesturing toward her vehicle. A sick feeling started forming in the pit of her stomach. "Excuse me," Kennedy called out, starting toward him. "Is there a problem?" Ji-ho looked at her then, really looked at her, and Kennedy felt the full weight of his assessment. His gaze traveled from her natural hair, pulled back in a neat ponytail, down to her second-hand backpack, taking in every detail that marked her as different from the Brookhaven elite. "Yes, actually," he said, his voice smooth and cold as ice. "There is a problem. You're parked in my spot." Kennedy glanced back at the parking space. "I don't see your name on it." "There's a sign," Ji-ho said, as if explaining something to a child. "Reserved for student council. I'm the student body president. Therefore, my spot." Kennedy walked back to the space and peered through the overgrown bush. Sure enough, there was a small, faded sign that she'd completely missed. Her stomach sank, but she wasn't about to show weakness on her first day. "Look," she said, turning back to him with her most diplomatic smile. "I didn't see the sign. Just give me a second to move my car and we can forget this whole thing happened." But Ji-ho was already speaking into his phone. "Yes, I need a vehicle towed from Brookhaven Preparatory Academy. Black Honda Civic, license plate." He rattled off her plate number while maintaining eye contact with Kennedy, a small, cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Wait, what?" Kennedy felt her diplomatic facade cracking. "You're seriously calling a tow truck? I said I'd move it." "Too late for that," Ji-ho said, ending his call. "Maybe next time you'll pay attention to the rules." "Welcome to Brookhaven Prep." He turned to walk away, his small entourage of admirers, following like ducklings after their mother. Something snapped inside Kennedy. She'd spent her entire life following rules, working twice as hard as everyone else, being twice as good just to be considered equal. And this privileged, arrogant boy thought he could just walk all over her because she'd made one mistake? "Let me guess," Kennedy called out, her voice cutting through the morning air. "Your daddy bought you that parking spot along with your personality?" The crowd that had been gathering went silent. Ji-ho stopped mid-stride, his shoulders tensing. He turned slowly, his expression shifting from mild irritation to genuine interest. No one, apparently, talked to Park Ji-ho like that. "Excuse me?" he said, taking a few steps back toward her. Kennedy felt every eye on the campus turn toward them, but she'd already committed. No point backing down now. "You heard me. I'm just wondering if money can buy everything, or if common human decency is still sold separately." "And you are?" Ji-ho asked, though Kennedy could see a spark of something dangerous lighting up behind his cold exterior. "Kennedy Hart, new student, academic excellence scholar." She emphasized the last part, letting him know she'd earned her place here. "And let me save you some time trying to figure out how to categorize me. Yes, I'm here on a scholarship. Yes, I'm from Decatur. No, I'm not impressed by your designer labels or your parking spot politics. And absolutely not. I will not be kissing your ass just because you think being rich makes you special. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, she's dead." Jiho's expression was unreadable now, but Kennedy could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Well, Kennedy Hart, academic excellence scholar, let me welcome you to Brookhaven properly. Here we have rules, we have order, and we have consequences for those who think they can just do whatever they want." He gestured toward the parking lot entrance where a tow truck was already pulling in. "Enjoy your first day. I'm sure it'll be memorable." Kennedy watched helplessly as her mother's car was hooked up to the tow truck. The humiliation burned through her chest, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of him. Instead, she turned back to Jiho with her sweetest smile. "You know what the difference between you and me is?" she asked. "I'm sure you're about to tell me," Jiho replied, matching her false sweetness with his own. "I earned my way here. Every single thing I have, I worked for. But you?" Kennedy let her eyes travel over his expensive watch, his designer bag, his perfectly styled hair. "You were just born lucky. And baby, luck runs out. But skill? That's forever." She walked past him toward the main building, her head held high even as her car was towed away, even as whispers followed in her wake, even as she felt Jiho's eyes burning into her back. She'd made an enemy on her first day, but at least it was an enemy who knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. What Kennedy didn't see was the small, genuine smile that crossed Jiho's face as he watched her walk away. Or the way his best friend, Lucas Kim, elbowed him in the ribs and said, "Dude, I think you just met your match." "We'll see about that," Jiho replied. But something in his chest felt different, like a lock he didn't know existed had just found its key. The rest of Kennedy's first day at Brookhaven Preparatory Academy was a blur of curious stares, whispered conversations, and teachers who seemed genuinely excited to have her in their classes. By the time lunch rolled around, she'd already been approached by 3 different clubs trying to recruit her, had accidentally insulted another rich kid by sitting in his usual spot in the library, and had gotten lost twice trying to navigate the massive campus. She sat alone in the cafeteria, the confrontation with Jiho playing on repeat in her mind as she picked at her sandwich. The cafeteria itself was more like a restaurant, with different stations offering everything from sushi to pasta to a full salad bar. Kennedy had packed her lunch that morning, not willing to spend money she didn't have on overpriced school food. "Is this seat taken?" A friendly voice broke through her thoughts. Kennedy looked up to see a girl with warm brown eyes and box braids pulled into a high ponytail. She was wearing the same uniform as everyone else, but she'd somehow made it her own, with small touches, colorful pins on her blazer, mismatched socks. "It's all yours," Kennedy said, grateful for any friendly face. "I'm Maya Jenkins," the girl said, setting down her tray. "And you're the girl who told off Park Ji-ho this morning. You're basically a legend already." Kennedy groaned. "Great. Just what I wanted on my first day. To be known as the girl who picked a fight with the most powerful student on campus." "Please," Maya said, waving her hand dismissively. Ji-ho needed someone to take him down a peg. He's been running this school like his personal kingdom since freshman year. It's about time someone challenged him. "Yeah, well, now my mom's car is an impound, and I have no way to get it out until she gets off work tonight," Kennedy said. "So I'm not sure the challenge was worth it." Maya's expression softened. That really sucks. Ji-ho can be vindictive when he wants to be. But hey, at least you stood your ground. Most people are too intimidated to even look him in the eye. "I don't intimidate easily," Kennedy said, and it was true. Growing up with Dante as a brother, dealing with her father leaving, watching her mother work herself to exhaustion just to keep them afloat, all of it had given Kennedy a backbone made of steel. Besides, he's just a boy. A rich, arrogant boy, but still just a boy. "Oh, he's definitely more than just a boy," a new voice chimed in. Another girl joined their table. this one tall and willowy with platinum blonde hair. Park Ji-ho is student body president, captain of the swim team, has a 4 gigapascals, and is pretty much guaranteed admission to any Ivy League school he wants. Plus, his father's company basically funds half the programs at this school. Great, Kennedy muttered. I picked a fight with Korean royalty. I'm Emma, by the way, the blonde girl said. And honestly, good for you. Ji-ho's been coasting on his name and his money for too long. Someone needed to remind him that not everyone worships the ground he walks on. The 3 girls talked through lunch, and Kennedy felt some of the tension from the morning start to ease. Maybe Brookhaven wouldn't be so bad if she could find her people, build her community, survive the social hierarchy she'd accidentally thrown herself into the middle of. But as lunch ended, and Kennedy headed to her afternoon classes, she couldn't shake the feeling that her confrontation with Park Ji-ho was far from over. She just didn't realize how right she was until she opened her locker after 6th period and found it had been moved. Excuse me, Kennedy asked the student next to her. Wasn't locker 247 right here this morning? The girl, a petite redhead, looked at Kennedy with a mixture of pity and amusement. Oh, you're the new girl. Yeah. Ji-ho had the office move your locker. Something about a clerical error in the assignment. Your new one is in the basement level. Kennedy felt her blood pressure rising. The basement level was where they kept the old textbooks and broken equipment. It was as far from her classes as possible, and generally considered the worst location in the entire school. Of course he did, Kennedy said through gritted teeth. Of course. By the time Kennedy made it home that evening, retrieved from the impound lot by a furious Dante who'd left his own classes early, she was exhausted, frustrated, and more determined than ever to not let Park Ji-ho win whatever game he thought they were playing. I'm telling you, Kennedy, these Brookhaven kids are bad news, Dante said as they pulled into their apartment complex, especially the Korean families. They run in packs, they protect their own, and they crush anyone who gets in their way. Since when are you an expert on Brookhaven politics? Kennedy asked, noting the tension in her brother's jaw. I just know, okay? Trust me on this. Stay away from Park Ji-ho and his whole crew. Kennedy studied her brother's profile, seeing something she couldn't quite name in his expression. Fear? Anger? Both? Dante, what aren't you telling me? Nothing, he said too quickly. Just trust me. That family is toxic. But Kennedy knew her brother well enough to know when he was hiding something. Still, she was too tired to push it tonight. She had homework to catch up on, a scholarship to maintain, and, apparently, a war to prepare for with the golden boy of Brookhaven Preparatory Academy. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Kennedy couldn't stop thinking about the look in Ji-ho's eyes when she'd challenged him. There had been surprise, yes, and irritation. But there had also been something else, something that looked almost like respect, or maybe intrigue, like she'd finally done something that caught his attention in a way that mattered. Kennedy fell asleep that night with no idea that Park Ji-ho was lying in his own bed across town, in a mansion that could fit Kennedy's entire apartment building, thinking about the girl who'd looked at him like he was nothing special and somehow made him feel more seen than he'd felt in years. The next 4 weeks at Brookhaven Preparatory Academy were a masterclass in petty warfare. Ji-ho would schedule student council meetings during Kennedy's lunch period, forcing her to choose between eating and participating in school activities. Kennedy would submit articles to the school newspaper highlighting the excessive spending on athletics, while academic programs struggled for funding. Ji-ho would accidentally bump into Kennedy's table in the cafeteria, sending her books and papers flying. Kennedy would beat him by half a point on their chemistry exam and make sure everyone in class knew it. Their confrontations became legendary. Students would literally pull out their phones when they saw Kennedy and Ji-ho heading toward each other in the hallways, anticipating the verbal sparring that had become daily entertainment. "Nice shoes, Kennedy," Ji-ho said one morning as they passed near the library. "On this decade?" "Nice personality, Ji-ho," Kennedy shot back without missing a beat. Oh, wait. You'd have to have one for me to comment on it. At least I can afford new shoes. At least I can afford to be a decent human being. Oh, that's right. Decency isn't for sale. No wonder you don't have any. Lucas Kim, who had started timing these exchanges for entertainment, held up his phone. 14 seconds, new record. But beneath the insults and the power plays, something strange was happening. Kennedy found herself looking forward to their confrontations. The way Jiho's cold facade would crack just slightly when she landed a particularly good comeback. And Jiho found himself engineering situations just to see Kennedy's eyes flash with that particular fire she got when she was about to verbally eviscerate him. Everything changed on a Wednesday in late September, when Principal Morrison made an announcement that sent both Kennedy and Jiho into a state of mutually assured destruction. This year's Regional Academic Decathlon will be held in November, Principal Morrison said during the morning assembly. And I'm pleased to announce that Brookhaven Preparatory will be represented by our two highest-performing students. She paused for dramatic effect. Park Ji-ho and Kennedy Hart will be our team for this year's competition. The auditorium erupted in whispers and barely suppressed laughter. Everyone knew about the ongoing war between Jiho and Kennedy. Putting them on a team together was either brilliant or catastrophic, with no middle ground. Kennedy felt her stomach drop. She caught Jiho's eye from across the auditorium, and for once, they were in complete agreement. This was a disaster. After the assembly, both Kennedy and Jiho showed up at Principal Morrison's office with the same goal: get out of this partnership. Principal Morrison, with all due respect, I don't think Kennedy and I would work well together, Jiho said, his tone carefully modulated to sound reasonable rather than desperate. I agree, Kennedy added. Our working styles are completely different. We'd probably kill each other before we even made it to the competition. Principal Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had seen every student drama imaginable, just smiled. That's exactly why I'm pairing you together. You're both brilliant, you're both competitive, and you both need to learn that collaboration is more valuable than ego. Brookhaven hasn't won the regional decathlon in 5 years. You two are our best shot. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to work together. You're going to represent this school with excellence, and you're going to prove that you're more than just your pride. But Kennedy started. No buts, Miss Hart. You accepted a scholarship that includes participation in academic competitions. And Mr. Park, as student body president, you're expected to lead by example. This is not negotiable. She stood, signaling the end of the discussion. Your first practice session is tomorrow after school in the library. Don't be late. Kennedy and Jiho walked out of the office in tense silence. They made it halfway down the hallway before Jiho spoke. Library, tomorrow, 4 p.m., don't be late. I'm never late, Kennedy snapped. Unlike some people who think the world waits for them. Right, because you're so punctual you didn't even see the parking sign on your first day. Kennedy whirled on him. Are you ever going to let that go? Are you ever going to admit you were wrong? They stood there, facing each other in the empty hallway, both breathing hard from the anger and frustration of being forced into this impossible situation. Fine, Kennedy said finally. Tomorrow, 4 p.m. But I'm warning you right now, Park Ji-ho. If you sabotage this because of our personal issues, I will make sure everyone at this school knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Same goes for you, Kennedy Hart, Jiho replied. This competition matters. Brookhaven's reputation is on the line. Then I guess we both better show up ready to work instead of fight. I guess so. They walked away in opposite directions, neither noticing the small smile on Principal Morrison's face as she watched them from her office window. She'd been at Brookhaven long enough to recognize potential when she saw it, even when it was wrapped in hostility and teenage pride. The next day, Kennedy showed up to the library at 3:55 p.m., determined not to give Jiho any ammunition. She found him already there, settled at a table in the back corner with his laptop, several textbooks, and an elaborate spread of food from what looked like an expensive catering service. You're early, Kennedy said, dropping her backpack on the table with more force than necessary. So are you, Jiho replied, not looking up from his screen. I ordered food. I figured we'd be here a while. Kennedy eyed the spread suspiciously. Sushi, fresh fruit, fancy sandwiches, bottled water, and what looked like actual china plates. Did you cater a study session? I like to be prepared. Jiho finally looked at her, and Kennedy noticed he looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes that even his expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. Besides, I know the cafeteria closes at 4. If you didn't eat lunch, you'd be hungry. It was such an unexpectedly considerate gesture that Kennedy didn't know how to respond. She'd been preparing for battle, not hospitality. I ate lunch, she lied. She'd actually skipped it to finish an essay for English class. Jiho's lips twitched like he knew she was lying but wasn't going to call her out. Well, it's here if you change your mind. Now, can we actually focus on the competition? They spent the first 20 minutes arguing about how to divide the topics. The regional decathlon covered everything from literature to science to current events, with a special emphasis this year on global economics and trade policy. Jiho wanted to handle all the economics sections, claiming his family background gave him an advantage. Kennedy insisted on taking at least half of them, refusing to be relegated to easier topics. I'm not saying you can't handle economics, Jiho said, his patience clearly wearing thin. I'm saying I have practical experience with global trade through my father's company. And I'm saying that your father's perspective is probably skewed toward corporate interests rather than the actual human impact of trade policy. Kennedy countered, which is exactly the kind of thing the judges will be looking for. Nuanced understanding, not just memorized facts. Jiho opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. That's actually a fair point. Kennedy blinked. Had Park Jiho just admitted she was right about something? Don't look so shocked, Jiho said, a hint of amusement in his voice. I can acknowledge good points when I hear them, even when they come from you. Wow, character growth. Who knew you had it in you? Keep pushing and I'll take it back. But there was no real heat in his words, and Kennedy felt something shift between them. Maybe, just maybe, they could actually do this without killing each other. 2 hours later, they'd outlined a study plan, divided topics in a way that played to both their strengths, and had actually managed to have a productive conversation about Keynesian economics without resorting to personal insults. Kennedy had even eaten some of the food, though she'd never admit out loud how good it was. Same time next week? Jiho asked as they packed up their materials. Wednesday works better for me, Kennedy said. I have to help my mom with grocery shopping on Thursdays. Something flickered across Jiho's face, but it was gone before Kennedy could identify it. Wednesday it is. As Kennedy walked to the bus stop, her phone buzzed with a text from Dante. Where are you? You said you'd be home by 5. Kennedy typed back quickly. Study session ran late. Academic decathlon stuff. Be home soon. With who? Kennedy hesitated. She knew Dante's feelings about the Brookhaven elite, especially anyone connected to the Park family. But she couldn't lie to him. Park Jiho. We're partners for the competition. Not my choice. Her phone rang immediately. Are you kidding me right now? Dante's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Dante, it's just a school competition. The principal assigned us as partners. I can't exactly say no. Yes, you can. Tell them you want a different partner. I tried. They said no. Look, it's not a big deal. We studied for 2 hours. We didn't kill each other. And we actually made progress. Can we please not turn this into a whole thing? Silence on the other end. Then, Kennedy, I'm serious. The Park family, they're not people you want to get involved with. They destroy things. It's what they do. Jiho is not his family, Kennedy said, surprising herself with the defensiveness in her tone. He's just a student, same as me. No, he's not the same as you. He's nothing like you. And the sooner you realize that, the better. Dante hung up before Kennedy could respond. She stared at her phone, frustration and confusion warring in her chest. What had the Park family done to make Dante so hostile? And why wouldn't he just tell her the truth? The study sessions became a regular thing. Every Wednesday and Friday afternoon, Kennedy and Jiho would meet in the library, review materials, quiz each other, and slowly, imperceptibly, build something that looked almost like respect. They discovered they both loved old movies, though Jiho's favorites were the classic Korean films his grandmother had shown him, while Kennedy preferred the sharp dialogue of 90 Seconds Black cinema. They both hated calculus, but excelled at it anyway. They both felt the weight of expectations, Kennedy carrying her family's hopes for a better future, while Jiho carried the legacy of a corporate empire he wasn't sure he wanted. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Jiho asked one evening during a break in their studying. It was late October now, the leaves outside the library windows turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Kennedy looked up from her notes, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" Jiho leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "Like the person everyone expects you to be isn't actually who you are? Like you're performing a role in a play you never auditioned for?" Kennedy thought about it. "Sometimes," she admitted. "When I got the scholarship to Brookhaven, everyone in my neighborhood acted like I'd won the lottery. Like I was their success story, proof that hard work pays off. And I am grateful, I am. But sometimes I wonder if I chose this, or if it chose me." "Exactly," Jiho said. And there was something raw in his voice that Kennedy had never heard before. "My father has my entire life mapped out. Wharton for undergrad, MBA from Harvard, then joined Park Industries as VP of Strategic Development. I'll be groomed for CEO, marry someone from a good family, have 2.5 kids, and continue the legacy. It doesn't matter what I actually want." "What do you actually want?" Kennedy asked softly. Jiho looked at her then, really looked at her, and Kennedy felt her breath catch. "I have no idea," he said. "I've never been allowed to figure it out." The moment stretched between them, heavy with understanding and something else Kennedy couldn't quite name. Then Jiho's phone buzzed, shattering the intimacy. "It's my father," he said, his expression closing off as he read the message. "I need to take this. I'll be right back." Kennedy watched him walk outside, phone pressed to his ear, his whole posture changing from relaxed to rigid in seconds. Through the window, she could see him talking, and even though she couldn't hear the words, she could read the tension in every line of his body. When he finally came back inside 15 minutes later, his jaw was tight and his eyes were cold again, the mask firmly back in place. "Everything okay?" Kennedy asked, even though it clearly wasn't. "Fine," Jiho said shortly. "Can we get back to work?" They studied in tense silence for another hour before calling it a night. As Kennedy packed up her things, she noticed Jiho was still sitting there, staring at his laptop screen without really seeing it. "Hey," she said, and he looked up. "I know we're supposed to hate each other or whatever, but if you ever need someone to talk to about the pressure and the expectations and all that stuff, I get it. Different circumstances, but same weight, so yeah. Just, putting that out there." Jiho's expression softened slightly. "Thanks," he said. "Same goes for you." Kennedy nodded and headed for the door. She was halfway across the library when she heard Jiho call her name. "Kennedy." She turned back. "For what it's worth, I think you'd be remarkable no matter what path you chose. Brookhaven is lucky to have you. Not because of what you represent, but because of who you are." Kennedy felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That's probably the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it," Jiho said, but he was smiling. A real smile. Not the practiced one he used for photos and public appearances. "I still think your debating style is needlessly aggressive. And I still think your obsession with protocol is pretentious and boring." Kennedy shot back, but she was smiling too. "See you Friday?" See you Friday. As Kennedy rode the bus home that night, she realized with a jolt of surprise that she was actually looking forward to Friday. When had that happened? When had Park Ji-ho stopped being just her enemy and started being something else? Something more complicated and infinitely more dangerous? That weekend, Kennedy was working on her article for the school newspaper when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's Ji-ho. Lucas gave me your number. Hope that's okay. Question about the economics section. Can you look at page 247 inches the textbook and tell me if I'm interpreting the graph correctly? Kennedy stared at the text for a long moment before responding. How do you know I have the textbook with me on a Saturday? Because you're Kennedy Hart. You probably sleep with that textbook under your pillow. Creepy, but accurate. And yes, you're interpreting it correctly, but you're missing the context from the previous chapter about market volatility. Can you send me your notes on that section? Absolutely not. Make your own notes. Come on. Aren't we supposed to be partners? Partners, yes. Your personal tutor, no. Page 231. Read it yourself. You're impossible. And yet, here you are, texting me on a Saturday. Only because I want to win. Sure, keep telling yourself that. But Kennedy sent him her notes anyway, and when Ji-ho texted back a simple thanks, you're the best, followed immediately by, don't let that go to your head, Kennedy found herself smiling at her phone like an idiot. Dante walked into her room without knocking, saw her expression, and frowned. Who are you texting? No one, Kennedy said too quickly, flipping her phone face down. Kennedy. It's just a study partner, Dante. Relax. Is it him? Park? Kennedy's silence was answer enough. Dante sat down on her bed, his expression serious. Kennedy, I need to tell you something. About the Park family. About why I've been so insistent that you stay away from them. Kennedy set down her phone, giving him her full attention. Okay, I'm listening. Dante took a deep breath. You were too young to remember. But Dad had a tech company, small, but growing, Hart Tech Innovations. He'd developed this software for small business inventory management. It was good, Kennedy, really good. He was getting interest from investors, had some solid contracts lined up. We weren't rich, but we were doing okay, better than okay. Kennedy felt her stomach tighten. She'd always known her father had some kind of business, but her mother never talked about it. And Dante had always shut down when she asked. Then Park Industries entered the market. Dante continued, his voice hardening. They were expanding their tech division, looking to corner the small business software market. They made Dad an offer for the company. A lowball offer, insulting really. Dad said no. He believed in his product, wanted to build it himself. What happened? Kennedy asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't be good. They destroyed him, Dante said flatly. Systematically. They launched a competing product, practically identical to Dad's, but with their massive marketing budget behind it. They undercut his prices. They spread rumors about Hart Tech's reliability. They poached his developers with offers he couldn't match. Within 6 months, every contract Dad had lined up fell through. His investors pulled out. The company went bankrupt. Kennedy felt tears pricking at her eyes. And Dad? Couldn't handle it. The shame, the failure, watching everything he'd built crumble. That's when he started drinking. That's when he stopped coming home. And eventually, he just didn't come back at all. Dante's voice cracked slightly. Park Industries bought the assets of Hart Tech for pennies on the dollar in the bankruptcy auction. They absorbed the technology, the patents, everything. And they made millions off of it. Oh my God, Kennedy whispered. I was 10 years old, and I had to watch Mom work 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. I had to watch her cry herself to sleep, thinking I couldn't hear her. All because Park Industries wanted to expand their market share and didn't care who they destroyed to do it. Does Ji-ho know? Kennedy asked. About Hart Tech? I don't know, Dante said. But his father gave an interview a few years ago about the company's strategic acquisitions, and mentioned Hearttech by name. Called it a successful integration of emerging technology. Like our family's destruction was just a line item in his quarterly report. Kennedy felt sick. All those study sessions, all those conversations, the growing connection she'd felt with Ji-ho, had he known the entire time who she was? Had this all been some kind of game to him? "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Dante said. I didn't want you to carry that weight. But now that you're at Brookhaven, now that you're spending time with him, you need to know the truth. The parks destroy things, Kennedy. It's what they do. And I can't stand by and watch you get hurt by them too. After Dante left, Kennedy sat on her bed, her mind racing. She thought about Ji-ho's comments about living up to family expectations, about being groomed for a role he didn't choose. Was he really just another corporate shark in training? Or was he also a victim of his family's legacy, trapped by expectations and reputation? Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Ji-ho. "Just finished the reading. You were right about the context. Want to quiz me on Monday before class?" Kennedy stared at the message, her finger hovering over the keyboard. She should confront him. She should ask him directly if he knew about Hearttech, about what his father had done to her family. But something held her back. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was a desperate hope that he truly didn't know. Or maybe it was the fact that, despite everything, she didn't want the fragile connection they'd built to shatter just yet. "Sure, meet in the library at 7:30, she typed back. "It's a date." Wait, not a date. A study appointment. A scheduled academic interaction. "I got it the first time. Just making sure. Wouldn't want you to get the wrong idea. Trust me, there's no danger of that." But as Kennedy tried to fall asleep that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Ji-ho's smile, the way he'd called her remarkable, the careful way he always made sure there was food at their study sessions, even though he pretended it was just him being prepared. And she couldn't reconcile that boy with the son of the man who had destroyed her father. Monday morning came too soon. Kennedy arrived at the library at 7:25, giving herself time to prepare for whatever this confrontation needed to be. But when Ji-ho walked in at 7:28, looking slightly disheveled and carrying 2 coffee cups, her resolve wavered. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said, handing her one of the cups. "I got you the caramel latte you mentioned liking. Hope that's okay." "You remembered my coffee order?" Kennedy asked, taking the cup automatically. "You mentioned it once, like 3 weeks ago," Ji-ho said with a shrug. "I have a good memory." They studied for an hour, quizzing each other on economic theory and trade policy. Ji-ho was focused and sharp, catching nuances she'd missed and offering insights that made her see the material in new ways. This was the part of him she'd come to appreciate, the genuine intellect, the quick wit, the way he challenged her to think deeper. As they were packing up, Kennedy decided she needed to know the truth. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Why do you care so much about winning this competition? I mean, you're already student body president, captain of the swim team, guaranteed admission to any school you want. What does one more trophy matter?" Ji-ho was quiet for a moment, carefully organizing his notes. "Because it's the only thing I'm doing that's actually mine," he said finally. "Swimming? My father decided I should swim because it's good for college applications. Student council? Expected for the Park family heir. My grades? Non-negotiable. But this competition, partnering with you, actually having to work with someone who challenges me and makes me think differently, it's the first thing in years that feels real. Like I'm doing it because I want to, not because someone else decided I should." Kennedy's heart twisted. She wanted to ask him about Hearttech, about his father's business practices, about whether he knew the role his family had played in her father's destruction. But looking at him now, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Not yet. "Well," she said instead, "I guess we better make sure we win then." Ji-ho smiled. "Guess we better." As October turned to November and the competition drew closer, Kennedy and Jiho fell into an easy rhythm. They studied together 3 times a week, texted constantly about everything from economics to their favorite movies, and somewhere along the way stopped pretending they hated each other. Lucas started calling them a divorced couple who still can't quit each other, which both of them adamantly denied, even as they kept finding excuses to spend time together. The shift happened on a cold November evening, 2 weeks before the competition. They were studying late, the library nearly empty except for them and the night custodian. Kennedy had forgotten her jacket, and the building's heat had been turned down for the night. She tried to hide her shivering, but Jiho noticed. He always noticed. Without a word, he took off his expensive Balenciaga hoodie and draped it around her shoulders. "I'm fine," Kennedy protested, even as she pulled the soft fabric tighter around herself. "You're turning blue," Jiho said. "Just wear it." "This probably costs more than my mom's monthly rent." "Then don't spill anything on it." Kennedy breathed in the scent of expensive cologne and something uniquely Jiho. The hoodie was still warm from his body, and she felt herself relaxing into it despite her better judgment. "Thanks," she said quietly. They studied in comfortable silence for another hour before Kennedy finally had to catch her bus home. As she gathered her things, she started to take off the hoodie. "Keep it," Jiho said. "It's cold out. You can give it back tomorrow." "Jiho, this is like a $500 hoodie." "I know. I bought it. Just bring it back tomorrow. Or the next day. Whenever." Kennedy wanted to argue, but the thought of walking to the bus stop in the November cold made her accept. "Fine, but if I lose it, I'm making you work out a payment plan." "Deal." The bus ride home felt different, with Jiho's hoodie wrapped around her. Several people stared, probably recognizing the designer label and wondering how a girl on the city bus could afford it. Kennedy tried not to think about what it meant that Jiho had given it to her, that he'd noticed she was cold before she'd said anything, that he'd willingly parted with something so expensive just to make sure she was comfortable. When she got home, Dante was waiting in the living room. His eyes went immediately to the hoodie. "Is that Balenciaga?" he asked flatly. "It's cold. I forgot my jacket. Jiho lent it to me." Kennedy tried to brush past him, but Dante stood, blocking her path. "Kennedy, what's going on with you and Park?" "Nothing. We're study partners. That's it." "Study partners don't give each other $500 hoodies." He was being nice. "Can we please not do this right now?" Dante's expression softened slightly. "Kenny, I know you. You're not wearing that hoodie like it's just a hoodie. You're wearing it like it means something." Kennedy felt her defenses crumbling. "Maybe it does. Maybe he's not what you think he is, Dante. Maybe he's just a person trying to figure out his life, same as me." "He's a Park," Dante said. "That's all he needs to be." "That's not fair," Kennedy shot back. "You don't know him." "And you do?" "Better than you think." Dante shook his head. "This is going to end badly, Kennedy. You realize that, right? There's no world where this works out. His family destroyed ours. That doesn't just go away because he buys you coffee and lends you expensive clothes." "I know," Kennedy said quietly. "I know, okay? I know it's complicated and messy and probably impossible. But for right now, for these few weeks until the competition is over, can I just have this? Can I just have something that feels good without overthinking it?" Dante looked at his sister for a long moment, seeing something in her expression that made his anger deflate. "Just be careful," he said finally. "Please, I can't watch someone else I love get destroyed by that family." Kennedy hugged him tightly. "I will, I promise." But as she lay in bed that night, still wearing Jiho's hoodie even though she knew she should take it off, Kennedy wondered if it was already too late to be careful. Her heart was already involved, already hoping for something that logic said was impossible. The regional academic decathlon arrived on a crisp Saturday morning in mid-November. The competition was being held at a convention center in downtown Atlanta, with 12 schools competing for the regional title. Kennedy had barely slept the night before, running through practice questions in her head, reviewing notes one last time, and trying not to think about the fact that this was the last official event she'd have with Ji-ho. After today, they'd go back to being just classmates. The forced proximity that had brought them together would disappear, and whatever this thing was between them would have to be addressed or ignored entirely. Ji-ho picked her up at 7 a.m., insisting that they drive together so they could review materials on the way. When Kennedy climbed into his Genesis GV80, she found he'd brought her favorite coffee and breakfast sandwiches from a local spot she'd mentioned once, weeks ago. "You remember everything, don't you?" she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Only the important stuff," Ji-ho replied, pulling out of her apartment complex. He looked nervous, Kennedy realized, though he was trying to hide it behind his usual composed exterior. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel, and he kept checking his phone even though it wasn't ringing. "Hey," Kennedy said, reaching over to still his hand. "We've got this. We've prepared more than anyone. We know this material backwards and forwards." Ji-ho looked at their hands where Kennedy was touching his, then up at her face. "I know. This matters. And I don't usually let things matter this much." "Well, get used to it," Kennedy said, pulling her hand back before the moment could become too charged. "Because we're about to go in there and show everyone what Brookhaven is made of." The convention center was massive, filled with students from across the region, all wearing their school colors and looking various degrees of confident and terrified. Kennedy spotted teams from elite private schools she'd read about, but never thought she'd compete against. The weight of what they were doing hit her all at once. She was here, Kennedy Hart from Decatur, representing one of the most prestigious preparatory academies in Georgia, partnered with the boy who was supposed to be her enemy but had somehow become something else entirely. The competition format was brutal. Individual rapid-fire questions, team collaboration challenges, debates, and finally, a comprehensive presentation on global economic policy. Kennedy and Ji-ho moved through the first rounds with practiced efficiency, their preparation evident in every answer, every strategic decision. When Kennedy stumbled on a history question, Ji-ho smoothly covered for her. When Ji-ho got tripped up on a literature reference, Kennedy filled in the gap without hesitation. By the time they reached the final round, Brookhaven was tied with 2 other schools. The final challenge was a presentation on the economic and social impact of corporate acquisitions on small businesses and communities, with specific focus on the technology sector. Kennedy felt her blood run cold. Of all the possible topics, this was the one she'd been dreading. She looked at Ji-ho and saw his face had gone pale. He knew. In that moment, looking at his expression, she knew that he knew exactly what his father's company had done, not just in general terms, but specifically. He knew about Hart Tech Innovations. They had 15 minutes to prepare their presentation together before going in front of the judges. In the prep room, Ji-ho started outlining their approach, but Kennedy cut him off. "You know," she said flatly, "about my father's company, Hart Tech. You know what your father did." Ji-ho closed his eyes. "Yes, I know." "How long?" "I found out 3 weeks ago. I was doing research for this competition, came across my father's old interviews, and I saw the name. I put it together when I remembered your brother's reaction at the first competition, the way you'd mentioned your father leaving. I confirmed it through some old news articles and company records." 3 weeks, Kennedy repeated, her voice shaking. "We've been studying together almost every day for 3 weeks, and you didn't think to mention that your family destroyed mine?" "I didn't know how," Ji-ho said desperately. "Every time I tried to bring it up, I froze. Because I knew this would happen. I knew you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me right now. And how am I looking at you? Like I'm him. Like I'm my father. Like everything between us was a lie." "Wasn't it?" Kennedy felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. "Not here, not now. Was this all some game to you? Get close to the daughter of the man your father crushed? Prove you could manipulate her too?" "No." Jiho's voice cracked. Kennedy, everything between us has been real. The most real thing in my life. I'm not my father. What he did to your family, it's unforgivable, and I understand if you can never forgive me for not telling you sooner, but I need you to believe that I never wanted to hurt you. A knock on the door interrupted them. 2 minutes until presentation. A competition official called. Kennedy and Jiho stared at each other across the small room. Outside that door were judges, competitors, their school representatives, everyone expecting them to perform. Inside this room was a truth that couldn't be ignored anymore, a hurt that couldn't be easily healed, and a connection that refused to die despite everything working against it. We have to go out there, Jiho said quietly. Whatever happens between us after, we owe it to ourselves to finish this, to prove we're more than our family's histories. Kennedy wanted to refuse. She wanted to walk away, to let him face the judges alone, to punish him for keeping this secret. But she also knew he was right. They'd worked too hard, come too far, to let it end like this. Fine, she said. We present, we win, and then we're done. No more study sessions, no more coffee runs, no more pretending that any of this was okay. Jiho's face fell, but he nodded. Okay, if that's what you want, it is. They walked into the presentation room with a professional distance that hadn't existed between them in weeks. The judges sat behind a long table, notebooks ready, expressions neutral. Kennedy and Jiho took their positions, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then, Jiho began. Corporate acquisitions in the technology sector often appear as simple business transactions on paper, but the real impact extends far beyond balance sheets and quarterly reports. He looked directly at Kennedy, his eyes conveying everything he couldn't say out loud. Every acquisition represents a human story, a family's dreams, a community's anchor. The ripple effects of these decisions touch lives in ways that can never be quantified in a boardroom. Kennedy picked up where he left off, her voice stronger than she felt. When large corporations engage in hostile acquisitions of smaller competitors, they don't just absorb assets. They dismantle communities. Small business owners who poured their lives into building something meaningful watch it crumble. Employees lose jobs. Families face financial ruin. The social fabric of communities weakens when local businesses disappear. They went back and forth, building their argument with data, historical examples, and theoretical frameworks. But beneath the academic presentation was a personal truth they were both finally acknowledging. Jiho presented the corporate perspective with a critical eye, explicitly condemning predatory practices. Kennedy discussed the human cost with emotional intelligence that made the judges lean forward, fully engaged. When they reached the final portion, the section on solutions and ethical frameworks, Jiho did something Kennedy didn't expect. He deviated from their prepared material. The cycle of corporate predation continues because we allow it to, he said, his voice carrying a weight that made Kennedy turn to look at him fully. Because sons inherit their father's empires, without questioning the methods used to build them, because profit matters more than people, because we value legacy over truth. He paused, looking at Kennedy with such raw honesty that she felt her breath catch. But it doesn't have to be that way. Change begins when we acknowledge the harm, accept responsibility, and commit to doing better, not because it's profitable, but because it's right. Kennedy understood then. This wasn't just a presentation about economic theory. This was Jiho's apology, his confession, his promise, delivered in the only way he could in this moment. She stepped forward for their conclusion. The question isn't whether corporate acquisitions will continue. They will. The question is whether the next generation of business leaders will perpetuate the same harmful practices or forge a new path built on ethical responsibility, community investment, and genuine partnership, rather than domination. They finished to silence. Then one of the judges started clapping, and the others joined in. Kennedy and Jiho bowed slightly and exited the room, neither speaking as they walked back to the waiting area. The results were announced an hour later. Brookhaven Preparatory Academy had won the Regional Academic Decathlon for the first time in 5 years. Kennedy and Jiho stood on the small stage accepting the trophy, their hands touching as they held it together, smiling for the cameras while everything between them remained unresolved. In the parking lot afterward, as students celebrated and parents took photos, Kennedy found Jiho leaning against his car, trophy in hand, looking more miserable than victorious. "We won," she said, approaching cautiously. "We did," he replied, not looking at her. "That thing you said in there about sons questioning their father's empires, did you mean that?" Jiho finally met her eyes, every word. "Kennedy, what my father did to your family was wrong. There's no justification, no excuse. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you as soon as I found out. I was scared of losing you, which is selfish and cowardly, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." "You should have told me," Kennedy said, her voice thick with emotion. "You should have trusted me with the truth." "I know, you're right, and I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but I need you to know something." He set down the trophy and turned to face her fully. "Meeting you changed my life. You made me question everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I wanted, about who I could be. You challenged me to think beyond the legacy I was supposed to inherit and consider what kind of person I actually want to become. And you did all of that just by being yourself, by refusing to be impressed by money or status or any of the superficial things everyone else cares about." "Jiho, I'm in love with you," he said, and the world seemed to stop. "I've been falling in love with you since the day you told me money can't buy brain cells and walked away like you owned the entire school. And I know the timing is terrible, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed you to hear it from me, in my own words, not in some presentation to judges. You're it for me, Kennedy Hart. You've been it since the beginning." Kennedy felt tears streaming down her face now, all the anger and hurt and confusion and affection she'd been holding back for weeks, finally breaking free. "You're an idiot," she said. "I know. You should have told me weeks ago. I know. I should hate you. You should. But I don't." Kennedy took a step closer. "I should. God knows I should, but I don't. And that makes me just as much of an idiot as you are." Hope sparked in Jiho's eyes. "Kennedy, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't make this harder than it already is. Your family destroyed mine. That's not something we can just ignore or get past with pretty words and declarations. My brother will never accept this. Your father would probably disown you. And I don't even know if I can trust you again, Jiho. Trust is everything to me, and you broke it." "Then let me earn it back," Jiho said desperately. "However long it takes, whatever I have to do, I'll spend every day proving that I'm not my father, that what we have is real, that you can depend on me." "I don't know if that's possible," Kennedy said honestly. "But you're not saying no." Kennedy laughed despite herself, a broken sound halfway between a sob and genuine amusement. "No, I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need time. I need to process all of this, to figure out what I want beyond what I feel in this moment. Because right now, I want to kiss you and hate you in equal measure, and I don't trust either of those impulses." "Time," Jiho repeated. "I can give you time. And space. No more study sessions, no more morning coffee deliveries, no more texting me at midnight with random questions just to have an excuse to talk. That's going to be hard. I know. But if this is real, if there's any chance of this being something sustainable, we need to be honest about the obstacles, starting with telling Dante the truth." Jiho paled. "Your brother is going to kill me." "Probably." Kennedy agreed. "But if you're serious about this, about us being more than just a competition partnership, then we face it together. The history, the hurt, all of it. Together," Jiho said. And despite everything, he smiled. I like the sound of that. Before Kennedy could respond, Lucas came running over, waving his phone. You guys are trending. Someone posted video of your presentation and it's going viral. People are calling it the most emotionally intelligent economic analysis they've ever heard from high school students. Kennedy and Jiho looked at each other, the weight of what they'd revealed in that presentation suddenly feeling more exposed. But there was also something freeing about it. They'd told their truth, even if the judges didn't know the personal context. They'd stood together and acknowledged the harm while pointing towards something better. I should go, Kennedy said, seeing her bus approaching the stop across the street. My mom's expecting me home. I could drive you, Jiho offered. I know, but I need the time to think. And you need the time to prepare for what comes next. What does come next? Kennedy picked up the trophy, feeling its weight in her hands. We tell the truth, all of it, to Dante, to your father, to everyone. And then we see if what we have is strong enough to survive reality. She walked away before Jiho could respond, before she could change her mind, before the magnetic pull between them could override her common sense. On the bus ride home, she clutched the trophy and her phone, which was already filling up with texts from Maya and Emma congratulating her on the win. But the only text she cared about came through as the bus crossed into Decatur. I meant what I said. Every word. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. J.H. Kennedy stared at the message for a long time before finally typing back, I know, and that's what scares me the most. At home, Dante was waiting, as Kennedy knew he would be. He took one look at the trophy, then at his sister's tear-streaked face, and knew immediately that something significant had happened. We won, Kennedy said, setting the trophy on their coffee table. I can see that. Why do you look like someone died? Because everything just got a lot more complicated. Kennedy sat down next to her brother and took a deep breath. I need to tell you something about Jiho and me. Over the next hour, Kennedy explained everything, the study sessions, the growing connection, the moment she'd realized her feelings had shifted from animosity to something deeper. She told him about Jiho's confession, about him knowing the truth about Hardtech for weeks and not saying anything. She told him about the presentation, about Jiho's public acknowledgement of corporate harm and responsibility. And finally, she told him about Jiho's declaration of love and her own confused, conflicted feelings. Dante listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When Kennedy finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. Are you in love with him? He finally asked. Kennedy wanted to deny it, but she'd promised herself honesty. I think I might be, or I could be, if I let myself. But I also know what his family did to us. I know what you went through, what Mom went through, and I don't know how to reconcile those two realities. You can't, Dante said flatly. Kennedy, some things are unforgivable. What the Parks did to our family, it didn't just cost us money. It cost us Dad. It cost us our stability, our sense of security. Mom still works herself to exhaustion trying to make up for what we lost. And you're telling me you have feelings for the son of the man who caused all of that? Jiho isn't his father, Kennedy said, but her voice lacked conviction. No, but he benefits from everything his father built, including the company that destroyed ours. He drives expensive cars, wears designer clothes, goes to elite schools, all funded by corporate practices that crush people like us. Dante's voice rose. And you think he's just going to what? Reject all of that? Turn his back on his family's empire because he has feelings for you? I don't know, Kennedy admitted. But shouldn't he have the chance to prove he's different? To break the cycle? At what cost to you? What happens when his father finds out? You think he's going to welcome you with open arms? Or is he going to see you as a threat, a reminder of the businesses he destroyed, and do everything in his power to drive you away from his son? Kennedy hadn't thought about that, She'd been so focused on her own family's reaction that she hadn't considered how Jiho's father might respond. "And what about your future?" Dante pressed. "You've worked so hard to get out of Decatur, to build something for yourself. Are you willing to risk all of that for a boy from a family that has already proven they'll sacrifice anyone for their own interests?" "It's not like that," Kennedy protested, but doubt was creeping in. "Jiho cares about me. He proved that today." "He proved he can make a good presentation," Dante corrected. "Words are easy, Kennedy. It's actions that matter. And the action here is that he lied to you for weeks about knowing the truth. If he really loved you, if he really cared, he would have been honest from the start." Kennedy felt her eyes filling with tears again. "So what are you saying? That I should just end it? Pretend like nothing happened between us?" Dante's expression softened slightly. He pulled his sister into a hug. "I'm saying protect yourself. I'm saying don't let your feelings blind you to reality. And I'm saying that if Park Ji-ho wants to prove he's different from his father, he needs to do more than make speeches. He needs to show you through consistent, honest actions that he's worthy of your trust. And until then, you need to be careful." "I told him I needed time," Kennedy said into her brother's shoulder. "Good. Take it. And while you're taking it, really think about what a future with him would look like. Because it's not just about the two of you. It's about two families with a painful history, two different worlds colliding, and all the complications that come with that." That night, Kennedy lay in bed thinking about everything Dante had said. He was right about so much of it. The risks were real, the obstacles enormous, the potential for heartbreak inevitable. But she also couldn't stop thinking about the way Ji-ho had looked at her during the presentation, the raw honesty in his voice when he talked about breaking cycles and choosing ethics over profit. She couldn't forget the months of study sessions, the genuine friendship that had developed beneath the antagonism, the way he noticed small things about her that no one else paid attention to. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ji-ho. "Can't sleep. Keep thinking about you. Hope that's not creepy." Despite everything, Kennedy smiled. "Little bit creepy, but I can't sleep either." "Want to talk about it?" "Not tonight. Tonight I just need to think." "Okay. But Kennedy, whatever you decide, about us, about everything, I respect it. Your happiness matters more than my feelings." "Don't say things like that. It makes it harder to be mad at you." "Sorry, I'll try to be more unlikable tomorrow." "You do that." "Good night, Kennedy." "Good night, Ji-ho." Kennedy set down her phone and stared at her ceiling. Somewhere across town, Ji-ho was probably doing the same thing, both of them trapped in the space between what they wanted and what seemed possible. Tomorrow would bring new complications, more questions, harder decisions. But for tonight, Kennedy let herself feel everything, the love and the fear, the hope and the doubt, the impossible wanting of something that logic said she shouldn't have. The next 2 weeks were torture. Kennedy and Ji-ho maintained their distance at school, passing in hallways with polite nods instead of easy banter. Kennedy threw herself into her schoolwork and her position on the newspaper, trying to fill the Ji-ho-shaped space in her daily routine. Ji-ho became even more focused on his student council duties and swim practice, pushing himself until Lucas finally staged an intervention. "Dude, you're going to burn out," Lucas said, watching Ji-ho complete his 50th lap without stopping. "This is about Kennedy, isn't it?" Ji-ho finally stopped, gasping for breath. "I don't want to talk about it." "Too bad. I'm your best friend, and you've been miserable for 2 weeks. Talk." So Ji-ho told him everything. About Heart Tech, about the presentation, about Kennedy asking for space, about feeling like he was drowning in the weight of his family's legacy and his own complicated feelings. "Do you love her?" Lucas asked when Ji-ho finished. "More than I've ever loved anything," Ji-ho admitted. "But I don't know if that's enough." "Have you told your father?" "About Kennedy?" "God, no. He'd lose his mind." "Maybe you should. Maybe he needs to know that his business decisions have real consequences. that they don't just affect strangers, but can impact his own son's life. You think he'd care? Lucas shrugged. Probably not. But at least you'd know where you stand. And if he reacts badly, well, that tells you something important about whether you want to follow in his footsteps. Meanwhile, Kennedy was having similar conversations with Maya, who'd noticed her friend's increasingly distracted state. "You're in love with him," Maya said, matter-of-factly over lunch. "I don't know what I am," Kennedy replied, pushing food around her plate. "Please, I've seen the way you two look at each other when you think no one's watching. And the way you've been moping since the competition? Classic heartbreak behavior. His family destroyed my family. How am I supposed to get past that?" "I don't know," Maya said honestly. "But I do know that Jiho isn't his father. And punishing him for things that happened before you even knew each other doesn't seem fair either. Dante says I need to protect myself. Dante also spent years building walls around his heart because of what happened with your dad. Is that what you want? To be so afraid of getting hurt that you never let yourself be happy?" Kennedy had no answer for that. The catalyst came 3 weeks after the competition, on a gray December afternoon. Kennedy was working late in the school newspaper office, putting together a story about the upcoming winter formal, when she stumbled across something that made her blood run cold. She'd been researching for a potential investigative piece about development projects in Atlanta when she found documents related to a proposed demolition of several low-income housing complexes and a community center in her own neighborhood. The paperwork showed forged signatures, backdated permits, and evidence of bribery involving a state senator and several developers. But what made Kennedy's hands shake was the name buried in the corporate filing. Park Industries was one of the major investors in the development project. Kennedy sat back, her mind racing. Was this more of the same? Was Park Industries still engaging in the kind of predatory practices that had destroyed her father's company? Did Jiho know about this? And if she exposed it, would she be destroying any chance of a relationship with him, or would she be giving him the opportunity to prove he was different from his father? She thought about the people in her neighborhood who would lose their homes if this project went through. She thought about the community center, where she'd spent countless afternoons as a kid, where Dante had learned to play basketball, where her mother had attended ESL classes when they'd first immigrated from Jamaica. Could she stay silent to protect her own heart when so many others were at risk? Kennedy knew what she had to do. She spent the next 3 days gathering evidence, interviewing residents, documenting everything she could find. She barely slept, running on coffee and determination, building an airtight case against the development project and everyone involved, including Park Industries. But before she published anything, she needed to talk to Jiho. She owed him that much, at least. A chance to explain, to distance himself from his father's company, or to defend it if he chose. She texted him on a Friday evening. "We need to talk, in person. It's important." Jiho responded immediately. "When and where?" "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the coffee shop on Peachtree." "I'll be there." Kennedy barely slept that night, rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd present the evidence, how she'd give him the chance to prove who he really was. But at 1 a.m., her phone buzzed with a call from Maya. "Kennedy, something's wrong. My cousin who works at City Hall, the one who gave me those initial documents, someone broke into her apartment. They trashed the place looking for something." Kennedy's blood went cold. Is she okay? Physically, yes. But Kennedy, whoever did this, they know we've been digging into this development deal, and they're willing to get violent to stop it. Did she go to the police? She's scared to. These people have connections. She thinks going to the police might make it worse. After hanging up with Maya, Kennedy sat in her dark bedroom, weighing her options. She could drop the investigation, publish her story about Winter Formal, and pretend she'd never seen those documents. She could stay safe, protect herself, avoid whatever danger was lurking around this development deal. Or she could follow the story where it led, expose the corruption, and deal with whatever consequences came. Kennedy knew which choice she had to make. The same choice her father had made years ago when he'd refused to sell his company to Park Industries. The same choice her mother made every day when she worked double shifts to provide for her family. The same choice Dante made when he'd put his own education on hold to help support them. The Harts didn't back down from fights, even when the odds were against them. But first, she needed one more piece of evidence: the original contracts with the forged signatures. Maya's cousin had told her they were in the old office building where the developers had been based before moving to a new location. They were scheduled to clear out the building this weekend, which meant it was now or never. Kennedy texted Dante, "I need your help with something tomorrow." But Dante had his engineering final, a test he'd been preparing for all semester. She couldn't ask him to sacrifice that. She texted back, "Never mind. Good luck on your test." Saturday afternoon, Kennedy took the bus to the old office building in East Atlanta. It was more run down than she'd expected, clearly abandoned, except for a few boxes waiting to be moved out. She slipped inside through a propped-open side door and made her way to the third floor, where Maya's cousin had said the executive offices were located. The documents were exactly where they were supposed to be, filed away in a cabinet that had been left behind. Kennedy pulled out her phone and started photographing everything, her heart racing with each click of the camera. She was so focused on getting good shots that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. "You're pretty persistent, you know that?" Kennedy spun around to find two large men blocking the doorway. They didn't look like movers or office workers. They looked like the kind of people who got hired to make problems disappear. "I'm just a student working on a school project," Kennedy said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Cut the shit," the taller man said, advancing into the room. "We know what you've been doing. Hand over the phone." Kennedy's mind raced. The only exit was blocked. Her phone was in her hand, but calling for help would take too long. She needed to buy time, needed to find a way out. "Look, I don't know what you think I have, but the phone, now." Kennedy made a split-second decision. She sent one text to Dante with her location and a single word: help. Then she threw the phone at the man's face and ran for the window. It was a stupid plan. The building was 3 stories up, there was no fire escape, and she had nowhere to go. But the act of throwing the phone had startled the men enough to give her a few seconds. She grabbed a metal pipe that had been left in the corner, probably from some old plumbing work, and held it like a baseball bat. "Stay back," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. The men laughed. This was exactly how Kennedy Hart found herself backed against a wall, holding a pipe, her phone destroyed on the floor, facing 2 men who clearly had no problem with violence. And then the door exploded inward, and Park Ji-ho burst through like an avenging angel in designer clothes, holding a crowbar and looking absolutely feral with protective rage. "Get away from her," he said, his voice deadly calm. Everything happened fast after that. Ji-ho swung the crowbar, connecting with the first man's arm. Kennedy used the distraction to slam her pipe into the second man's knee. Ji-ho took a hit to his shoulder, but stayed on his feet, fighting with a desperate energy Kennedy had never seen from him. She threw boxes at the men, buying Ji-ho time to recover. They fought together, messy and desperate and real, until they heard sirens approaching. Dante burst through the door seconds later, having called 911 on his way, and the 2 men realized they were outnumbered and surrounded. By the time the police arrived, Kennedy and Ji-ho were sitting on the floor, breathing hard, both bruised but alive. In the ambulance, as paramedics checked them over, Kennedy finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "How did you know to come?" Ji-ho, sporting a split lip and a bruise forming on his cheekbone, smiled slightly. "Dante called me, got your text, realized he was 40 minutes away and I was 10 minutes from that address. So he called me, said his sister was in danger, and if anything happened to you because I didn't get there in time, he'd kill me himself." "Dante called you?" Surprised me too. But turns out, when it really matters, He cares more about your safety than his pride. Jiho reached for her hand carefully. Are you okay? Kennedy looked at their joined hands, at Jiho's torn shirt, and the concern in his eyes, at the way he'd literally fought for her without hesitation. I had evidence, she said. About the development project, about Park Industries being involved. I was going to show you tomorrow, give you a chance to explain or distance yourself or whatever. But now you know I'll choose you over my father's company every time, Jiho finished. Kennedy, I didn't know about that project. But when I get home, I'm going to find out everything about it. And I'm going to make sure my father knows I won't be part of any business that operates that way. Even if it means walking away from Park Industries entirely. You'd do that? For you? I'd do anything. He squeezed her hand gently. I love you, Kennedy Hart. I know it's complicated and messy and probably impossible, but I love you. And I'm done letting fear or family expectations or anything else stop me from fighting for what I want. Which is you, if you'll have me. Dante climbed into the ambulance before Kennedy could respond, his face a mixture of relief and residual anger. He looked at their joined hands, at Jiho's protective posture even while injured, and something in his expression shifted. Thank you, Dante said gruffly to Jiho, for getting there in time. Always, Jiho replied. I'll always come when she needs me. Dante studied him for a long moment, then looked at Kennedy. He fought 2 guys for you, took hits to make sure you stayed safe. That's got to count for something. It counts for everything, Kennedy said, tears finally falling. It counts for everything. Later, after police statements and hospital checkups and her mother's tearful relief at seeing her safe, Kennedy and Jiho sat on the steps outside her apartment building. The December air was cold, but neither of them wanted to go inside yet. I'm still mad at you, Kennedy said, for not telling me about Heart Tech sooner. I know. And this doesn't fix everything. We still have to deal with our families, with the history, with all the complications. I know. But I love you too, Kennedy finished. And I'm tired of fighting it. I'm tired of pretending that what we have isn't worth fighting for. Jiho turned to her, hope and love and determination written across his bruised face. So what do? We tell the truth, Kennedy said, echoing her words from weeks ago. We face it together. The good, the bad, the impossible. We don't hide from it, or pretend it doesn't exist. We acknowledge the harm, work to make it right, and build something new, something better. Together, Jiho said, pulling her close. Together, Kennedy agreed. And finally, she kissed him. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and fraught with obstacles. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was worth every impossible moment that had led them here. 3 months later, Kennedy stood in front of the city council presenting her findings about the development project. Beside her was Jiho, who had spent weeks helping her organize the evidence, and who had very publicly resigned from any future position with Park Industries in favor of pursuing environmental law. Across the room sat both their families, Diane and Dante, still wary but slowly accepting, and Jiho's parents, strained but beginning to understand that their son was charting his own path. The development project was stopped. The community center was saved. And Kennedy and Jiho proved that sometimes the best love stories aren't the easy ones, but the ones where 2 people choose each other despite everything working against them, and then work together to make the world a little bit better than they found it. As they walked out of City Hall hand in hand, Jiho pulled Kennedy close and whispered, "Still think I'm an entitled rich boy?" "Absolutely," Kennedy replied with a smile. "But you're my entitled rich boy, and you're getting better. With you, I want to be better. You make me want to earn the privilege I was born into." "Good," Kennedy said, kissing him softly, "because I'm not done challenging you yet. I wouldn't want it any other way." And somewhere in the distance, they could hear Dante telling Lucas, "If he hurts her, I'm still going to kill him." Noted, Lucas replied, but I think they're going to be okay. And against all odds, they were. Kennedy never published her investigation piece in the school newspaper. Instead, she'd taken it straight to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where a real investigative journalist named Marcus Webb had been tracking similar development corruption for months. Her evidence was the missing piece he needed, the smoking gun that connected state senators to developers to shell corporations designed to hide illegal activity. When the story broke in January, it made national news. What Kennedy hadn't anticipated was the backlash. Within 24 hours of publication, her name was everywhere. Conservative outlets painted her as a troublemaker, trying to stop legitimate development. Liberal outlets held her up as a hero fighting gentrification. Social media exploded with opinions about the 17-year-old girl who'd taken on corporate corruption and won. And through it all, Kennedy just tried to survive her senior year, while the world debated whether she was brave or reckless. The threats started 3 days after publication. Anonymous emails telling her to watch her back, cars following her to and from school, someone spray-painted "snitch" across her mother's car. Diane wanted to pull Kennedy out of Brookhaven, send her to finish senior year at Decatur High where she'd be safer, surrounded by people who knew her. But Kennedy refused. She hadn't come this far to run away now. Jiho became her constant shadow. He drove her to school every morning, walked her between classes, waited outside her newspaper meetings. His swim team friends formed an unofficial protective circle, making sure Kennedy was never alone in hallways or parking lots. Even students who'd previously ignored her or whispered about the scholarship girl now nodded respectfully when she passed. She'd stopped a development project that would have destroyed dozens of families' homes. That earned respect even from Brookhaven's elite. But the real tension was happening behind closed doors, in conversations Kennedy wasn't part of but felt the ripple effects of constantly. Jiho's father had demanded a meeting the night the article published. Jiho had come to school the next day with bruises on his knuckles from punching a wall and a steely determination in his eyes that made Kennedy both proud and terrified. "What happened?" she'd asked, pulling him into an empty classroom. "I told him I was done," Jiho said, his voice rough. "Done pretending I don't see how Park Industries operates. Done turning a blind eye to the harm we cause. Done planning a future I never chose." He looked at her with such intensity that Kennedy felt it in her bones. "I told him I love you, that you've shown me what real integrity looks like, and that I'd rather lose everything than become the kind of man who values profit over people. Jiho, your family, your future. My future is mine to decide, not his. And I choose you, Kennedy. I choose us. I choose being able to look at myself in the mirror and like what I see." Kennedy had kissed him then, hard and desperate, pouring all her fear and love and gratitude into it. When they broke apart, Jiho had smiled despite everything. "My father's furious. Cut off my credit cards, threatened to stop paying for college, the whole dramatic patriarch routine. But my grandmother, she pulled me aside after he stormed out. Told me she was proud of me for finally standing up for something real. Your grandmother knows about us? She's known for weeks. Says she can always tell when her grandson is in love, because he gets this ridiculous smile whenever his phone buzzes." Jiho had demonstrated said smile right then, making Kennedy laugh despite the gravity of their situation. "She's on our side. Says the Park family needs someone to shake things up, bring in some new blood, new perspectives." Pretty sure she meant that literally. But Park Industries wasn't going down without a fight. 2 weeks after the article, Kennedy received a letter informing her that her academic excellence scholarship was under review due to concerns about student conduct and judgment. The letter was carefully worded, never explicitly mentioning the investigation, but the message was clear. Powerful people wanted her silenced, and they were willing to destroy her future to do it. Kennedy had sat in Principal Morrison's office, the letter trembling in her hands, trying not to cry. "They can't do this. I didn't break any rules. I didn't do anything wrong." Principal Morrison had read the letter with pursed lips and growing anger. This is coming from the board of directors, not from me or any school administrator. And yes, they absolutely can review scholarships for any reason they deem appropriate. She'd looked at Kennedy with something like admiration and fury mixed together. But they won't succeed. Not if I have anything to say about it. What can you do? They're the board. They control funding. I can make a lot of noise. I can contact every education reporter in Georgia and tell them that Brookhaven Preparatory is trying to punish a student for exposing corruption. I can remind the board that this school's reputation depends on producing ethical leaders, not obedient ones. And I can personally go to bat for you at the review hearing. She'd stood, all 5 feet 2 inches of her radiating protective fury. You did the right thing, Miss Hart. And I'll be damned if I let them punish you for it. The scholarship review hearing was scheduled for early February. Kennedy had 3 weeks to prepare her defense, to prove that her investigation was in line with Brookhaven's values of academic excellence and ethical leadership. 3 weeks to convince a board of wealthy donors and business leaders, some of whom probably had their own questionable practices to hide, that she deserved to keep her scholarship. Jiho immediately went into strategy mode. We need to build a case. Show that what you did exemplifies everything Brookhaven claims to value. We need testimonials from teachers, students, community members. We need to make it politically impossible for them to revoke your scholarship without looking like they're protecting corrupt developers. Maya and Emma mobilized the student body. Within days, over 300 students had signed a petition supporting Kennedy's scholarship. The school newspaper ran a front-page editorial about the importance of investigative journalism and civic responsibility. Teachers submitted letters praising Kennedy's character and academic performance. Even some parents, ones who'd initially been skeptical of the scholarship girl from Decatur, spoke up about how impressed they were with Kennedy's courage. But it was Lucas who came up with the most effective strategy. We go public, he said during a planning session in Jiho's living room, now that his father had mostly stopped speaking to him and couldn't object to Kennedy being there. We contact every news outlet that covered the original story and tell them Brookhaven is trying to punish the student who exposed the corruption. Make it a story about institutional retaliation against whistleblowers. The board won't be able to withstand that kind of scrutiny. Dante, who'd been invited to the strategy session and was slowly warming to Jiho after watching him defend Kennedy for weeks, nodded approval. That's good. Put pressure on them from the outside while Kennedy builds her case on the inside. Force them to choose between their reputation and whatever favors they owe to the developers. Kennedy looked around the room at her support system. Jiho, who'd sacrificed his relationship with his father for her. Lucas, who'd become a genuine friend despite their rocky start. Maya and Emma, who'd stood by her when the threats started. Dante, who'd put aside years of anger to help protect his sister. Principal Morrison, who was risking her own position to defend a student. Even Jiho's grandmother, who'd sent a formal letter to the board expressing her disappointment in their treatment of such a remarkable young woman. I don't know how to thank all of you, Kennedy said, her voice thick with emotion. You don't thank us, Jiho replied, taking her hand. You keep being exactly who you are. You keep fighting for what's right. You keep showing everyone what real courage looks like. That's all the thanks any of us need. The night before the hearing, Kennedy couldn't sleep. She'd prepared her statement, rehearsed her arguments, organized her evidence. But lying in bed at 2 a.m., all she could think about was what she'd lose if the board decided against her. Brookhaven wasn't just a school anymore. It was where she'd found her voice, discovered her strength, met the people who'd become her chosen family. It was where she'd fallen in love with a boy who'd challenged her to see beyond surface judgments, who'd proven that people could change and grow beyond their family's legacies. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jiho. Can't sleep either. Want to meet somewhere? 20 minutes later, Kennedy was sitting next to Jiho in his car, parked at their spot overlooking the Atlanta skyline. They'd discovered it a few weeks ago, a small park on a hill where the city lights spread out like fallen stars. It had become their place, where they came to talk when everything else felt too heavy. "What if I lose?" Kennedy asked quietly. "What if tomorrow they decide I'm not worth the trouble and revoke my scholarship?" Jiho was quiet for a moment, then turned to face her fully. "Then we figure out plan B. There are other schools, other scholarships. My grandmother has already offered to personally fund your education if it comes to that. I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's an investment in someone she believes in, someone we all believe in." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But Kennedy, you're not going to lose. Because what you did matters. The families who get to keep their homes matter. The community center that's staying open matters. You reminded everyone that some things are more important than money and connections. That matters." "I'm scared," Kennedy admitted. "Not just of losing the scholarship. I'm scared of what comes after. We're graduating in a few months. You're going to some Ivy League school, probably Yale or Princeton. I'll be lucky to afford state school, even with scholarships. How do we survive that? How do we make this work when our lives are pulling us in different directions?" Jiho took both her hands in his. "You want to know what I've learned from you? That the hard things are usually the things most worth doing. Yes, we're graduating. Yes, we'll probably be at different schools. But Kennedy, I've spent my whole life having every decision made for me. And for the first time, I get to choose something that's just mine. I choose you. I choose fighting for us even when it's hard. I choose building a future where we both get to become who we're meant to be, and we do it together." "That's a beautiful speech," Kennedy said, tears streaming down her face. "But what if beautiful speeches aren't enough? Then we write a better story. We prove that love isn't about perfect circumstances or easy choices. We prove that two people from different worlds can build a bridge between them if they're willing to put in the work." He wiped away her tears gently. "Tomorrow you walk into that hearing room and you remind them who Kennedy Hart is. Not the scholarship girl, not the troublemaker, but the brilliant, courageous, unstoppable force who saw injustice and refused to look away. And whatever they decide, we face it together." Kennedy kissed him then, soft and slow and full of all the things she couldn't put into words. When they finally pulled apart, she felt steadier, stronger, ready to face whatever tomorrow brought. The scholarship review hearing took place in Brookhaven's main conference room, a space usually reserved for donor meetings and board decisions. The room was packed with board members, school administrators, and a handful of reporters who'd gotten wind of the proceedings despite attempts to keep it private. Kennedy sat at a table facing the board, Principal Morrison on one side, and a lawyer the ACLU had provided on the other. Behind her, she could feel the presence of everyone who'd come to support her. Her mother, who'd taken the day off work, Dante, who'd skipped classes, Jiho, Maya, Emma, Lucas, and at least 20 other Brookhaven students who'd packed into the observer section. Board Chairman Richard Hawthorne called the meeting to order. He was exactly what Kennedy had expected. Late 60s, expensive suit, the kind of practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "We're here to review the Academic Excellence Scholarship awarded to Miss Kennedy Hart and determine whether recent actions warrant reconsideration of that award." Kennedy's lawyer stood immediately. "Before we begin, I'd like to state for the record that this review appears to be retaliatory in nature, targeting a student for exercising her First Amendment rights and engaging in investigative journalism that exposed genuine corruption." "That's not what this is about," Hawthorne said smoothly. "We're simply concerned about whether Miss Hart's judgment aligns with Brookhaven's values." "Which values exactly?" Principal Morrison interjected, her voice sharp. "The value of seeking truth, the value of standing up for what's right, the value of using one's education to benefit society, because Miss Hart exemplifies all of those perfectly." The hearing proceeded with the formality of a trial. Board members questioned Kennedy about her investigation. her decision to go to the press, her understanding of the potential consequences. Kennedy answered each question calmly, clearly, explaining her reasoning and defending her choices. She presented her evidence: the testimonials from teachers, the petition from students, letters from community members whose homes had been saved by her investigation. Then came the moment Kennedy had been dreading. One board member, a woman named Patricia Simmons, who Kennedy knew had ties to several development companies, leaned forward with a cold smile. "Miss Hart, isn't it true that your relationship with Park Ji-ho influenced this investigation? That you were, in fact, trying to embarrass Park Industries because of a personal vendetta related to your father's failed business?" The room went silent. Kennedy felt Ji-ho tense behind her, felt Dante's anger radiating from his seat, but she kept her composure, looking Miss Simmons directly in the eye. "No, ma'am. My relationship with Ji-ho began after I started investigating the development project. And my father's business didn't fail. It was deliberately destroyed by unethical corporate practices, which is exactly the kind of behavior I'm committed to exposing regardless of who's involved." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But since you've brought up my relationship with Ji-ho, let me be clear about something. He's shown me what it looks like to question inherited power, to break from family expectations when they conflict with personal ethics. He's proven that privilege is only valuable when it's used to uplift others. So yes, he's influenced me, but not in the way you're suggesting. He's influenced me to hold myself and everyone around me to a higher standard of integrity." Ji-ho was smiling. Kennedy could tell without looking back. She'd just publicly defended their relationship and called out the board's attempt to use it against her. And she'd done it with the kind of eloquent defiance that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. The hearing continued for another 2 hours. Kennedy's lawyer presented legal precedent protecting student journalism. Principal Morrison gave an impassioned speech about Brookhaven's mission to develop ethical leaders, not obedient followers. Maya testified about Kennedy's positive impact on student journalism and civic engagement. Even one of the board members, a younger woman named Dr. Chen, who taught at Emory, spoke up about the importance of supporting students who demonstrate moral courage. Finally, Hawthorne called for a vote. All in favor of upholding Miss Hart's academic excellence scholarship? Kennedy held her breath, watching hands raise around the table. Principal Morrison had warned her that it would be close, that several board members had financial ties to the development companies and wouldn't vote in her favor. She counted the hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. She needed 8 for a majority. The 8th hand rose slowly. It belonged to Thomas Park, Ji-ho's father, who'd been sitting silently in the back of the room throughout the entire proceeding. Kennedy's eyes widened in shock as she watched him raise his hand, his expression unreadable. "Motion carries," Hawthorne said, clearly unhappy with the outcome. "Miss Hart's scholarship is upheld. This hearing is adjourned." The room erupted. Students cheered. Diane burst into tears of relief. Principal Morrison gripped Kennedy's hand tightly, smiling with fierce pride. But Kennedy was staring at Thomas Park, trying to understand what had just happened. Ji-ho made his way through the crowd, to his father Kennedy following close behind. For a moment, father and son just looked at each other, years of tension and expectation and disappointment hanging between them. "Why?" Ji-ho asked simply. Thomas Park glanced at Kennedy, then back at his son. "Because she reminds me of your grandmother when she was young. Stubborn, brilliant, unwilling to compromise her principles." He paused, something like regret crossing his face. "And because my son is willing to lose everything for her, which means she must be worth it. I haven't always made ethical choices in business, Ji-ho. I've prioritized profit over people more times than I can count, but I will not be the reason my son loses the woman he loves. I've taken enough from people. I won't take this from you, too." It wasn't a full apology. It didn't undo years of harmful business practices or erase the pain the Park family had caused others. But it was a start, an acknowledgement, a tiny crack in the armor that might someday become genuine change. "Thank you," Jiho said quietly. Thomas nodded stiffly. "Don't thank me yet. You're still cut off financially until you prove you can make it on your own merit, not my money. Consider it character building." But there was the faintest hint of a smile on his face as he said it. Outside the conference room, Kennedy was immediately surrounded by friends and supporters. News cameras captured her walking out victorious, surrounded by her community, her scholarship intact and her integrity uncompromised. That night, social media exploded with celebration. The hashtag numbered Justice for Kennedy, trending alongside stories about student activism and institutional accountability. But for Kennedy, the real victory came later that evening. Sitting on her apartment steps with Jiho, watching the sunset and processing everything that had happened. "We did it," she said, still hardly believing it. "We actually did it." "You did it," Jiho corrected. "I just provided moral support and occasional transportation." "You provided everything," Kennedy said seriously. "You stood by me when it would have been easier to walk away. You fought with your father, risked your future, all because you believed in me and what I was trying to do. That's what you do when you love someone. You fight for them. You stand with them. You become better because of them." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Besides, you've made my life infinitely more interesting. Can you imagine how boring my senior year would have been without you? Probably much more peaceful." "I don't want peaceful. I want real. I want challenging. I want you." Kennedy turned to face him fully, cupping his face in her hands. "I love you, Park Ji-ho, and not despite all the complications, but because you've shown me that complications are just opportunities to prove what we're made of. I love you too, Kennedy Hart. My match, my challenge, my future." They kissed as the sun set over Atlanta, two people from different worlds who'd built a bridge between them through courage, honesty, and a love that refused to be simple or easy, but was real in all the ways that mattered. 3 months later, they graduated together. Ji-ho gave the valedictorian speech, using his platform to talk about privilege, responsibility, and the importance of questioning inherited power. Kennedy received the school's Ethics in Leadership Award, presented by Principal Morrison, with tears in her eyes. They were headed to different colleges in the fall, Ji-ho to Yale and Kennedy to Georgetown, on a full scholarship she'd earned through her investigative journalism. But they were committed to making it work. At the graduation party, Dante approached Ji-ho with an expression that was almost friendly. "Take care of my sister," he said. "Always," Ji-ho replied. "And if you ever hurt her, you'll kill me. I know, it's been established." Ji-ho smiled. "But, Dante, thank you for calling me that day when Kennedy was in danger, for giving me a chance to prove I'm not my father, for protecting her when I couldn't." Dante studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "You're all right, Park. For a rich kid." They shook hands, and Kennedy watched the exchange with tears in her eyes, her brother and the boy she loved finally finding common ground. Her family and his slowly learning to coexist. It wasn't perfect, and there were still wounds that would take years to heal, but it was progress. It was hope. As the party wound down and guests started leaving, Kennedy and Ji-ho slipped away to the roof of the school, their secret spot where they'd come to talk during late study sessions. They stood together looking out at the city, at all the possibilities spreading before them. "Ready for the next adventure?" Ji-ho asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "With you?" "Always," Kennedy replied, leaning back against him. "As long as we're together, I'm ready for anything." And she meant it, because they'd already survived the impossible. Hatred turning to love, enemies becoming soulmates, two families with painful history learning to coexist. If they could survive all that, they could survive anything. The future was uncertain, complicated, and undoubtedly challenging, but it was theirs, built on a foundation of honesty, courage, and a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Kennedy and Jiho had proven that sometimes the best love stories aren't the easy ones, but the ones where two people choose each other despite impossible odds, and then spend their lives proving that choice was worth it. As they stood together, watching the stars emerge over Atlanta, Kennedy smiled. The rich Korean boy had met his match when she transferred to his school. And in the process of becoming enemies and then lovers, they both discovered who they truly were and who they wanted to become. Together. Always together. The end.